big brown fox jumps over the... Oh, hi. How you doing? Welcome to my YouTube video series, How to Write. My name's Sean Sanders, and today we're going to look at basic punctuation. But first I want to explain a couple of things, one of which is why basic punctuation has not been taught in public schools since 1960. If you can believe it, it hasn't. When I was a kid in New Zealand, that's where my accent is from. When I was a kid in New Zealand, I was told that you put a comma where you think there should be a pause. And in the college classes I teach today, when I ask a classroom full of college students, where does a comma go? Mostly they'll tell me where you think there's a pause. And of course, this is not a comma rule. This just does not work. So the reason that basic punctuation and basic grammar is no longer taught and hasn't been for 50, 60 years now was because it was the decision made in the education system fairly high up that grammar Nazis were ruining high works of literature for young people. The thinking was that because there were cruel people with rulers smacking children on the wrist every time they put a comma in the wrong place, that the children were becoming discouraged and they would never want to read the great works of literature if they were treated this way. So they decided they would simply get rid of the grammar Nazis and get rid of the grammar as well. And so basically they threw the baby out with the bathwater, because unless you are taught basic grammar, you won't pick it up through reading. I read a huge amount. And while that helped, I still was semi-literate when I went to college myself. So the good news is that basic grammar is very simple, it's clear, it's effective, and if you use it consistently, your writing will improve. There's no question about it. The other thing I wanted to mention before we get into basic grammar is it concerns note-taking. It has been shown again and again and again that people who take notes retain information and learn more effectively than people who don't. So if you just watch this video and expect to learn from it, well, you may, but imagine if you join a sports team, for example, and you decide that by watching football or watching basketball or by watching ballet, you're going to become a great ballerina. It's not going to happen. You have to do it. You have to engage your brain. So I highly encourage you to take notes. And I'm going to ask you to write sentences as I write them. And become part of this process as we build sentence structure on the page. I'm going to encourage you to do that because the brain will switch on. There's a difference between passive learning and active learning, and we want to be active. And in fact, we want to be proactive. We want to be ahead of the game, right? So you can't just sit there and expect the stuff to, stick unless you sort of engage and keep your brain occupied by note-taking. One other thing I wanted to point out is that creative writing is very different from academic writing. So what we're going to look at here could be called academic writing, but basically it is correct writing. This is correct sentence structure. This is not debatable. These techniques are not debatable. They're agreed upon. They're a given for people who know basic academic style. But when you read a novel or any kind of creative work, those writers break all the rules. The good ones know the rules and they know how to break them. So I encourage you to learn the rules too, so that if you go from this, we will look at creative writing later in this series, and we will see how the two compare and how the academic style is basically a foundation for the creative writing. And if you decide to dive into creative writing without knowing these basics, it's just the same as academic writing. You won't actually know how to edit your own work if you don't know how these rules work. So let's start lesson 1, shall we? Okay. Let's take a look inside the textbook. If you don't have the textbook, you can just follow along with me here. There won't be any surprises. So, sentence structure and why we need it. So here's an example of student writing. This came directly from a student paper. One woman told about her son Scott, who was in the Navy by the time he was 17 and passed away. She says he loved it. Now, I don't know if the writer knew this, but technically he loved passing away, according to this. So the writer hasn't said exactly what they wanted to say. So here's a version. If we interpret this, we can interpret it this way. One woman spoke about her son Scott, who was in the Navy. She said he loved it. Okay, this is probably accurate. Here's a version 2, a little more information. One woman described her son Scott, who loved being in the Navy and passed away at age 17. That sounds kind of like it might be what they wanted to say, but in fact, it seems like he was 17 and passed away. Maybe he passed away at 17, which was the same time he got in the Navy, but it's very hard to tell exactly what's going on. There's some information missing here. So here's version 3. One woman described her son Scott, who joined the Navy when he was 17. She says he loved it. Yep, okay. Scott died at age, we're not sure. It could have been 17, but he was in the Navy by the time he was 17 and passed away. So we're left guessing. This is really the bottom line here. Is it important that we're guessing? Well, when we look at academic style writing and when we look at our legal systems and all the systems in our society that are so heavily dependent on good literacy, it seems that the details do matter. And if this writer really wanted us to know the details, they should have been clear, but they assumed that we would get it. But there's something missing here, and part of the problem is basic sentence structure. So which version is the most correct? Probably version 3. We're just not sure about some of the details. So don't underestimate the simplicity of where we're about to go right now with this. Basic grammar and basic punctuation is extremely simplistic when you first look at it, but don't underestimate it. It is the cornerstone of all writing in the English language. Basic sentence structure and punctuation are essential if you want to write clearly and if you ever want to edit your own work. Okay, so what we're doing when we use this basic punctuation and this structure is coding and decoding. So here's a code. Cat plus dog equals home. Well, that's nice. Oh, okay. So we change one piece of that code and we get a completely different image, right? We get a completely different image. So we want the code we put on the page to be clear enough that the reader will always be able to decipher it. That is, your reader should be able to decode what you put down on the page and get the same meaning from it that you wanted them to get. If you put something on the page and it has a different meaning to the reader, then you haven't communicated. So the first thing we're going to look at here is a clause. So what is this? What is a clause? A clause basically subject plus verb. Simple as that. A subject is usually the first noun in a sentence. So, let's make up a sentence. This is very easy to decipher because here we have the subject and here we have the verb. In every sentence we write, we want to know where the subject and the verb are. There are two general styles of writing. One is considered active, it's termed active writing. The other is passive. Passive writing has a place in creative writing. And we will look at that at some point in this series. But right now we're going to focus on active style because that is the most efficient way to deliver information. We always have the subject and the verb pretty near the start of the sentence, usually speaking. And in fact, all we need for a sentence to be technically accurate is to have a subject and a verb. I could say, I am. There we have a subject, there we have a verb. So this is a technically accurate sentence. It's grammatically correct. However, if we wrote a story or an essay simply using little clauses like this, the reading would become very boring very quickly and our readers would fall asleep. So what we actually want to do is figure out how to join clauses in a sentence. So here we have our subject and verb. The boy sang, the girl listened. So here again, subject, verb. Here's a clause, here's a clause. We want to join these two in the same sentence so we can create some sentence variety. So what have I done here? I've used a comma, certainly, and I've used a conjunction to join two clauses in a single sentence. So what are the conjunctions? Let's have a look at this. You might have heard of these. You might be familiar with them. Fan boys. Simply a way of remembering for and nor, but, or, yet, so. So there are 7 conjunctions. These are sometimes called coordinating conjunctions, and there's 7 of them in the English language. We mostly use 3. And that's what we're going to look at here today. The boy sang and the girl listened. And means in addition to. But is contrary to expectation. And so is like saying therefore, which is the same as saying cause and effect. Now once again, I'll remind you that this stuff is simple, but don't underestimate the power of these basic combinations. Again, we are creating a code on the page. And as a reader, when I see this, what the writer is signaling me is they are telling me, okay, there's another clause coming. Now, it's not like when I'm reading a novel, I stop every time I see this combination and think, okay, what's coming next? But here's what happens. It's like driving a car. When you drive up to an intersection and the light turns red, you don't think about it for a few minutes before you stop. You just automatically know that it's red, you stop. If you see a yield sign, you automatically know you better keep an eye out because of what's coming. And again, this is how this works. It's sort of a peripheral coding system that lets me know that there's another clause coming. And it's a courtesy to the reader. Now again, it seems simplistic. But what I'm doing is I am developing trust between myself as the writer and the person who is reading this. And when my punctuation and my coding is clear and accurate, the reader will come to trust me. They will come to trust my style. So let's have a look at these conjunctions a little bit more. Let's have a look at this. The boy sang. Let's use but this time. How many clauses in this sentence? If you said 2, you are right. And here we have a comma and a conjunction. Subject, verb, subject, verb. 2 clauses joined with a comma and a conjunction. So, are these always conjunctions? No, they're not. And again, may seem tricky at first, but actually it's very simple. You just have to use it consistently. So let's take a look at this word "and" for a minute. The boy subject verb, subject verb, verb. Is this a subject? No. This is called the object. We could talk more about objects, but basically it's not a subject because it's coming later in the sentence. There's a verb assigned to this noun here. The subject and verb go together. The boy is the subject, and here's what he did, and here's what he did. There is no verb. The guitar does not do anything in this sentence. So there's no comma here. Why is that? Well, here's why. There is only one clause in this sentence. Think of it like a math equation. Up here we have a placeholder for a subject and a verb, and a placeholder for a subject and a verb. And this, comma and conjunction, is signaling the reader about the form that the next clause is going to take. Conversely, if I put a comma here, I'm going to be signaling the reader to be looking for a new subject and a new verb. But there is no new subject. It's the same subject all the way through, right? So there is only one clause here. If I put a comma here, I would be signaling the reader to expect a new clause when there is not one. Again, this seems like such a small detail. Does it matter? Well, it matters if you want to communicate clearly with your reader. Because if you have a small grammatical error once in a while, it doesn't really matter. It's not the end of the world. But if you have a small grammatical error every sentence, or if your punctuation is inconsistent, the reader will trip up over your coding. You will be sending a code to expect one thing, and they will get something else. Now, when that happens to me as a reader, I can go back and read the sentence, and that's fine. But if I have to go back and reread half of the sentences in your paper or your story, that's going to be tiring for me. In addition, I will realize that your signals cannot be trusted, and so I will not be able to immerse myself in the information you're trying to deliver. I will be trying to untangle the meaning. So, basic coding is essential because it tells your reader how you have coded your sentence structure. So, let's have a look at comma rule number 1 in the textbook for a minute. Now, I've sat with thousands and thousands and thousands of students and looked at their work, and basic commas are the thing that is most often missing or inaccurate or misleading. So this is why I start out with basic comma rules, and I call these basic comma rules comma rule 1, 2, and 3. And today we're just looking at comma rule 1. You have plenty of time, I'm sure, to practice writing a few sentences in this style once you understand how it works. So here we have a clause. The girl ran. The boy dawdled. Now, I've since been told this is a kind of an English word. Dragged his feet, perhaps you could say. But here we have a comma and a conjunction. And as I read this, I know that the writer is setting me up for a new clause. That is going to be the structure of this sentence. So, comma rule 1. There are very technical phrases that linguists like to use to describe what you and I are looking at right now on the page. I don't believe that you have to understand how to define a dangling participle. I don't think you have to understand what an adjectival conjunction looks like. I think you simply have to be able to identify the form of structure in a sentence and know how to use it. So I simplify things and I call them comma rule 1, 2, and 3. These are the core basic comma rules that I think are essential for every developing writer to understand. So comma rule number 1 says this: every time you use more than one clause in a sentence, they must be joined by a comma and a conjunction. The girl ran for the bus, but the boy dawdled, so the driver did not wait. So here we see subject verb, there's a clause, there's a clause, there's a clause. Joined by a comma and a conjunction, comma and a conjunction. If you have the textbook, this is page 63. Now, we could technically keep adding clause after clause after clause, right? So the driver did not wait, and the boy was late for school. So the teacher got mad. You know, we could go on and on like this, dot, 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 forever. We don't really want to do that. We want a sentence that has an idea, that encapsulates an idea that the reader can digest almost as if you're sitting down eating a meal. You don't want to shove all of this information down the reader's throat in one go. We can do it simply in nice bite-sized pieces. The girl ran for the bus, but the boy dawdled, so the driver did not wait. Maybe we could start a new sentence here if we wanted to. The boy was late for school, so the teacher got mad. And as I do this and I add these clauses, I know there's a subject and there's a verb. There's a subject, there's a verb. So, as we look at identifying clauses and as we look at identifying subjects and verbs, let's do a quick refresher on the basic kind of nouns we have. We have regular nouns. These are simple objects: table, chair, sky. Easy peasy, right? We have pronouns, words like he, she, it, someone. She ran for the bus. Here we're not using the subject, the girl. We're simply saying she ran for the bus, but he dawdled. These are pronouns. And here we have the driver, not a pronoun. To be super clear in our writing, we could use proper nouns, and proper nouns are titles. You probably know this. We have capitals on proper nouns. They're very specific. Jane ran for the bus, but Dave dawdled, so the bus driver did not wait. Here we know exactly who we're talking about. Pronouns can be a little difficult sometimes because we're not sure sometimes who she is, but if we use proper nouns, we're absolutely sure. So let's go back to thinking about clauses for a minute. Write out this sentence. Dave raked the leaves and mowed the lawn. How many clauses in this sentence? Well, how many subjects? There's one. There's a verb. Rake the leaves. Is that a subject? It's a noun, but is there a verb that goes with this? Do the leaves do anything? Nope. Mowed. Here's a verb. Who did the mowing? Dave. Dave did all that. There's only one clause in here. But if I say this, comma and a conjunction, what do we expect to see next? A clause. Dave raked the leaves and he mowed the lawn. Subject, verb. So it's a pronoun, but it takes the place of a noun. So we have a subject verb here and a subject verb here, joined by a comma and a conjunction. This is comma rule number 1. Now, if I wrote this, what I'm actually doing is misdirecting the reader, because I'm saying, hey, expect a clause. And as a reader, I'm going to come into this. There's my subject and verb, and mowed the lawn. Now, I will still get the meaning of this. Even though the punctuation is wrong, I will still understand it. But if you have lots of this kind of thing going on in your writing, you're constantly misguiding your reader, and they will become frustrated. They will have to work twice as hard to understand your writing compared to writing that is clearly punctuated. So let's have a look in this textbook once again. Just have a quick look here at another example. Julio is a great football player. Subject, verb. And a very nice guy. This is wrong, right? Down here we can see, okay, now we've got the subject in place, so this is good. Does that make sense? Now, I don't have to have this in here if I don't want it. I can say Julio is a great footballer and a very nice guy, and that's fine. As I read this, I know to read straight through here because I'm not being told to expect a new clause. I know that anything I read here is going to be in addition to this. Julio is a great footballer and a very nice guy. Now, once more I'll remind you that, yes, this seems simplistic, but not all of our sentences are simple examples like these. Sometimes we're going to want to write fairly tricky sentences. We're going to struggle to find meaning out of language. So let's have a look at this actually. These examples, so there's a subject, are, there's a verb. These examples are fairly simple to decode. So you might be asking subject, verb, comma, conjunction. What's the big deal? The big deal is that most sentences are not as simple as these. They take, subject and verb, they take effort to read and understand, comma, conjunction. So if the reader, subject, is not given help, verb, on how to decode your writing, they will quickly lose patience with you, the writer. So the big deal is this. Do you want that job? Do you want that raise? Do you want to fund your project or impress the local council? Do you want to write that novel that sells 1 million copies? Do you want to fulfill your potential? I'm not kidding about that. I believe that by becoming fully literate, you stand the best chance of fulfilling your potential as an individual in our highly competitive society. I would encourage you now to take a moment and practice writing a few of these basic simple sentences. I've said it before, I will continue to say it. I know this is simple, but this is the cornerstone of basic grammar. And if you don't understand these basics, as I didn't when I went to college, you're unable to edit your own work. And if you can't edit your own work, how do you know what you've actually said? How do you know if you've delivered the message you wanted to deliver? Okay, well, I think that's enough for now. Practice writing some basic sentences. How many clauses can you add in a sentence before it gets too much? Try writing a paragraph using just comma rule number 1. We will move on to comma rule number 2 and comma rule number 3. And we will also look at some of the basic commas that you probably already know. we'll look at those rules and see how they tie in with these. But keep using this information consistently in your writing, and your writing will improve. It may take a few months, it may take 6 months or a year, but if you do it consistently, you will become a much more effective communicator. Have a good one.